pedestal. The water pot is the emblem of the 19th Jinnah, and the symbol is in the usual place where Jinnah's emblems are found on statues. It is interesting to note that the lack of images showing Malli as a female is adduced as evidence that this Jinnah could not have been a female, for example by a Digambara author. He says, "No one in the world has ever perceived the alleged femininity of the image of the Lord Malli. On the contrary, those images are always depicted in masculine gender. The Lord under debate must be a man because he is never portrayed as female in his images. This is like the images of Mahavira, which are well known to be male in the tradition of both parties." Indeed, represented as stereotyped figures, Jinnahs are either seated in the lotus pose or standing in the Kayotsaka position. But this is to be seen as a representation by default, as it were. Jinnah images are conceived as material aids for meditation and thus show emancipated souls, not their physical features. One author who discusses the Digambara position regarding the impossibility of female emancipation remarks, I quote, "The Siddhas are neither male nor female." This is echoed in modern perception. For example, Whitney Kelting reports that upon asking one of her female informants why Mallinatha's image looks like a man, this informant almost dismissively said, "A Jinnah is not really a man or a woman. A Jinnah is beyond the specifics of its birth." Indeed, to Shvetambara Jains, Malli is valued as a Jinnah, not as a women role model. The place of women in the Jinnah's lives is also an element of diverging positions among Shvetambaras and Digambaras in relation with the question of marriage. Rishabha, the first of the 24 Jinnah, is a distinct case. As the inventor of techniques and social institutions, among them marriage, he is said to have married two wives, Sumangala and Sunanda. From the former, he had Bharata and Brahmi, plus 49 pairs of twin sons, and from the latter, Bahubali and Sundari. Otherwise, according to the Digambaras, none of the Jinnahs did assume the responsibilities of a householder or king before becoming monks. According to the Shvetambaras, on the other hand, the situation is more complex. Although all sources state the fundamental reluctance of future Jinnahs to marriage, some did marry and others did not. This is presented as an issue in Hemachandra's account of the life of the 12th Jinnah Vasupujya. When he comes of age, his parents request their son to marry, although they know he is reluctant to do so. Among the arguments his father puts forward is that of custom, followed by his predecessors. So the father says, "The blessed first Jinnah married Sumangala and Sunanda on his father's advice. Just because of his father's command, he took the kingdom and governed it and adopted mendicancy at the right time after enjoying pleasures of the householder life. The Lord attained emancipation afterwards by taking initiation. Other Jinnahs, number 2 to 11, married and supported the earth at their father's advice and then attained emancipation. Do you do this? Follow your predecessors by accomplishing marriage, sovereignty, initiation and nirvana." Vasupuja answers by referring to the theory of karmas, concluding that there is not one path for the arhats because of the difference in the karma. His parents are unable to counter this point, thus he is initiated without marrying. In his argument, Vasupuja explains that Jinnahs who have karmas with pleasure as its fruit, surviving in them, must destroy these karmas by pleasure. Therefore, they should marry. This, he says, applied to Jinnahs number 2 to 11 and will apply also to Jinnah number 24 Mahavira. He argues that on the contrary, Malli, Nemi and Parshva will become mendicants for the sake of emancipation without marrying or ruling. Those among the Jinnahs who married all fathered a son. As they were all of royal families, he was the heir of the kingdom they left when they entered religious life. But there is one notable exception to this pattern, and not the least. Complying with his parents' wish, the young Mahavira in the Shvetambara tradition married Princess Yashoda. Their child was a daughter named Priyadarshana. No justification or explanation seems to be provided in the sources for this fact, which remains puzzling. Priyadarshana later married Jamali, who was Mahavira's nephew through his sister. This is an instance of cross-cousin marriage, a South Indian practice which has been a constant feature of family alliances in Western India too. Both Jamali and Priyadarshana became mendicants following Mahavira, but later on, Jamali wandered separately from him and became a dissident. At first, Priyadarshana and her group of nuns supported Jamali's faction because, the text says, of delusion which is easily acquired by women and because of former affection. Later on, one day while collecting wares, the potter dropped intentionally a spark of fire which was unnoticed on Priyadarshana's monastic robe. When she saw that her robe was being burned, she said, "Look, my robe is burned by your carelessness." The potter said, do not speak falsely, Sadhvi, for according to your doctrine, it is proper to say such a thing when the whole robe has been burned. Since only part of it has been affected, she should not have said this. Thus, this incident clearly proves to Priyadarshana that she, in fact, agreed with Mahavira's teaching, and she came back to his fold after having made an atonement, while Jamali remained alone, sticking to his idea. This narrative construction, which makes Mahavira the father of a daughter and not of a son, and a daughter who contributes to endanger his prevalence before coming back to his fold, may be significant to express the important position a woman may have in the transmission and preservation of values. It may also show how a woman may be subject to bad influence and need safeguards. The insistence on associating a female lineage with Mahavira is probably deliberate, as not only his daughter is mentioned, but in the same passage of the Kalpa Sutra, his granddaughter, all this without any particular comment. As far as I know, later commentaries do not expand on this either, and do not see it as an issue, although this insistence is uncommon. To conclude, I would say that the three areas I have briefly covered show that the Jain tradition has indeed evolved original ways of making women a fundamental component of its system of ideas and practices, especially among Shvetambaras, who in addition symbolically give a full-fledged place to women in relation with Mahavira. The high number of nuns, which is typical of Shvetambara monastic orders, is a correlate to this. A nun is by herself a respected person and part of a tradition. It is because being a nun forms a life itinerary highly valued in society that it can offer a proper alternative to life in society and openings for accomplished destinies in what looks like happiness. The nun you see here, talking to a crowd of assembled women, communicates a feeling of liveliness that is quite typical of many of her colleagues. But generalizing on Jainism as feminist is hardly impossible, so diverse are the situations of the monastic orders and their retreats, depending on social and regional factors. Thank you.
All right. I think we have some time for a few questions in the audience. Any questions?
You mentioned about Malinathji. So has there been a conclusion to whether it's a he or a she? Or
Well, a conclusion is difficult to say because there are there is Digambara tradition where Mallinatha is a he, definitely, and the Shvetambara tradition where Mallinatha is a she, in the beginning of her life. But as I tried to show, even in Shvetambara accounts where Mallinatha is a she in the beginning, as soon as Mallinatha enters religious life, this female aspect is not so important actually.
So gender is not important.
Well, it is important. As a kind of the story. The fact that the story introduce Mallinatha as a she in Shvetambara tradition is in itself an assessment of the importance and the conviction that even a she can attain emancipation. I see it like that.
I also, this is not a question,
Yeah.
but listening to you, today if you look at the society or the business world, we people always get a question, why the society is dominated more by male and we need to promote females as executives and others. Listening to you, it seems that we Jains thought of this thousands of years ago, and today we just see a manifestation of what the conception was about the role of women in society. So I thought it was a great learning for me particularly, that we can say that what people see today, we had conceived that idea 1,000 years ago. So thank you for refreshing us with that. I think it means a lot that yes, we were way ahead of time.
Okay.
Good. I think there's a question over there.
Yeah, so my question is the 24th Tirthankara Mahavira. So the four pillars what he established after establishing the religion, as we say in Jainism, was Sadhu, Sadhvi, Shravak and Shravika. While the 23rd Tirthankara, Bhagwan Parshvanath, he has two. So it was Sannyas Jivan and Sadhu Jivan. So do you think that during the time from Parshvanath Bhagwan to Mahavir Bhagwan, this thing evolved that we have to empower women, and that's why Bhagwan Mahavir went on and distinguished it further into Sadhu, Sadhvi and Shravak, Shravika, thereby equalizing everything. So what's the take on that?
Well, I'm not so sure that there is a real difference between them on this point, because even for Parshvanath, when there is a description of his life and so on, the statistics of the fourfold Sangha is also given. So that means, he was also having, I think, a community of fourfold members. So I don't really, see what you you think that sadhvis were not, there were no sadhvis in Parshva's time?
They were sadhvis, but as I read, I have limited knowledge of scripture, whatever I read, but from that I had this thing that Bhagwan Mahavir established four pillars that was distinguished, like Sadhu, Sadhvi, Shravak and Shravika. And at the time of Parshvanath, there was no distinction as such. So even if you're a male or a female, definitely there were nuns at their time and before that, but there was no distinction as such that you can lead a sadhu or sadhvi, or there was no distinction as such in the literature about it. But after that, it came up as in Bhagwan Mahavir's time, it was Sadhu, Sadhvi and Shravak, Shravika. There was a clear distinction there. So in their pillars. So
I'm sorry, I don't know really what to say to that, because this is...
I may answer that, I'm not sure, but I think there was simplicity and complexity, and I think a lot of what Mahavir did is to simplify what could be misunderstood rather than reinvent, and maybe that's another explanation.
Yeah, it's more kind of reformation, or adjustment rather, than creating something new. Mahavira's time.
I had a question. In the Svetama tradition, Marudevi, that's
Yes.
Vishnu's mother, is said the first person to get moksha.
Moksha,
How does
yes.
that relate with the Digambar tradition? How does it relate to this dialogue where women may not be able to get moksha?
Yeah, well, this is particular to Shvetambara tradition, and this is also, I think, a kind of assessment of, giving this possibility, giving this example, as a person who can get emancipation is again, like for Malvinat, I think, a way to assess that this is something possible according to Shvetambara doctrine. Because I mean, when the fact of having very famous characters or very important characters, they serve as illustrating or I mean embodying this idea actually, whether it's Marudevi or whether it's Mallinatha, I feel.
Great, thanks.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just continuing with what Arpit said, up to time of Bhagwan Parshuram, Jains had only 4 vows. And at the time of Mahavira,
Yes.
he added brahmacharya as a vow.
Yes.
Before that, women were kind of considered an object, so non-possession kind of used to cover the women also. So when Mahavira started brahmacharya, that means women are given a separate entity there. So that way, what Arpit was telling, that maybe from Mahavira's time there was a better recognition of women's role in society.
Yeah, that is possible. Yeah, in that sense, yes. I mean, there was perhaps a kind of more affirmative statement that women have a real place in the structure. I mean, yeah.
Are there more rules and regulations for nuns in Jainism than there are for monks?
Yes, yes. If you see, I mean, the normative texts, they always say, I mean, they give some general rules for monks and nuns, and then sometimes they give some specific rules for nuns.
How come?
How come?
How come the discrimination where nuns have specific ones and monks don't?
Well, it's a discrimination, but I mean, in the views of these the authors of this text, who mostly are men, or one should say that. Anyway, so the idea is that, I mean, as I tried to show, I mean, nuns are more vulnerable than monks, and so they need more protection, and so this is the avowed, I mean, idea, and the result is that they have more restrictions.
Other questions?
Hi, this is just a topic about women in general and like the menstrual cycle. Is there anything that you've read up in the texts about what they perceive? Because in the olden days they have the woman casted out during the 3 days of her menstrual cycle.
Yes.
And you can't go to the temple and you can't worship, and even to this day people do that.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the text scriptures that you've read as regards to women and that role?
You mean in the period of?
In the period of the Jinas, I mean, like in the period in the text that you're.
Yeah, about their temporary exclusion. You mean
Yes, like
during
they
that
were-
period?
yes,
Yeah. I mean, as you say, I mean, even today there are some monastic orders among the Shvetambaras where I mean, women, whether they are nuns or I mean, lay women, are excluded from the ritual or from I mean, touching the images and from going to pilgrimage places and all that during this period. And there are rules also for them, I mean, in the old texts. Because this was part also of the Indian, general Indian environment. I mean, in the general Indian society, we see in the Dharma Shastras, I mean, the law texts, not of Jains, but of other parts of the society, that there were rules of exclusion for ladies in that period, and that also relates and applies, I mean, to women in the Jain texts. So there are some specific rules. Yeah.
I was thinking more in a religious term, whether there was written in, is it an ancient religious text, whether it was discriminated as being unhygienic, or I don't know what actually, I wonder whether they made it more as a society, community thing, rather than was it written in the scripture that this is how women are seen at that time. I mean,
Yes,
they
yes.
seem to be,
Untouchable?
yeah, like untouchable.
Yeah, I mean, they are considered as impure during this period.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, they are considered as impure in general, and of course even more for as far as religious acts are concerned.
Not when they're a nun.
Sorry?
Not when they're a nun, though. Like the nuns who have taken
Yeah, well,
the...
for nuns also there is a period, I mean, there is a time when they have to be they have to follow some specific rules and they are excluded from the main ritual and all that. Yeah, yeah.
One more question.
I heard that you study Buddhism also. Is there a lot of difference between Buddhist nuns and Jaina